Hi, I'm Alex. 3 years ago, I was sitting at my family's Thanksgiving table in Cedar Falls, Ohio, when my father looked me straight in the eye and said I'd never amount to anything more than a disappointment. Last Tuesday, his phone rang while he was having coffee with his buddies at Murphy's Diner downtown. It was General Patricia Martinez calling to personally congratulate him on raising such an exceptional daughter, referring to me as Colonel Johnson. The look on his face when he realized who was on the other end of that call? Well, stick around, because what happened next changed everything between us forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Cedar Falls was like living in a snow globe, beautiful from the outside but suffocating when you're trapped inside. My father, Robert Johnson, worked as a shift supervisor at the Whitman Manufacturing plant. The kind of man who believed hard work and keeping your head down were the only paths to respect. My mother, Linda, spent her days managing the household and working part-time at the local library, always caught between supporting her husband and protecting her children. My younger sister, Sarah, was everything I wasn't: studious, compliant, the kind of daughter who brought home report cards that got hung on the refrigerator with pride. I was 17 and drowning in my senior year of high school when everything started falling apart. While Sarah excelled in her AP classes and planned her future at Ohio State University, I was struggling to maintain a C average in basic courses. The guidance counselor, Mrs. Peterson, had already suggested I consider community college or trade school, her voice gentle but her message clear. I wasn't college material. The worst part wasn't the academic struggles, it was watching the disappointment grow in my father's eyes. Every time another failed test came home, every time another teacher conference revealed my lack of progress, every time I proved I wasn't the daughter he'd hoped for. My father had grown up poor in rural Kentucky, worked his way through high school while supporting his younger siblings, and viewed education as the ultimate ladder out of poverty. He dreamed of college himself, but circumstances forced him into factory work straight after graduation. When Sarah and I came along, we represented his second chance, his opportunity to see his children achieve what he couldn't. Sarah was living up to that dream beautifully, but I was failing spectacularly, and he made sure I knew it. The house on Maple Street where we lived was modest but well-maintained, a 2-story colonial with a front porch where my mother grew tomatoes every summer. It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other's business, where success was measured by steady employment and children who didn't cause trouble. I was definitely causing trouble, not in dramatic ways, but in the quiet, persistent manner of a child who couldn't seem to find her place in the world her parents had created for her. My bedroom was on the second floor, overlooking the backyard where my father had built a small workshop. I used to watch him there in the evenings, methodically working on projects with a precision and focus I envied. He could transform raw wood into beautiful furniture, fix anything that broke around the house, solve problems with his hands that I couldn't solve with my mind. Sometimes I thought he wished he could rebuild me as easily as he restored old chairs or repaired broken appliances. The tension in our house was like a low-grade fever, always present but not always acknowledged. Dinner conversations revolved around Sarah's achievements, her acceptance letters, her scholarship opportunities, while I sat quietly eating my mother's pot roast and trying to become invisible. My father wasn't cruel, exactly, just increasingly distant, as if he'd given up trying to understand why his eldest daughter couldn't seem to succeed at anything she attempted. School was its own special form of torture. Cedar Falls High School was small enough that everyone knew everyone, which meant my academic struggles were public knowledge. Teachers who had loved Sarah 3 years earlier looked at me with thinly veiled disappointment, as if preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Wondering how 2 children from the same family could be so different. I wasn't rebellious or disruptive, just lost, sitting in classrooms where the material felt like a foreign language I couldn't quite grasp. My best friend during those years was Emma Rodriguez, whose family had moved to Cedar Falls from California when we were in middle school. Emma was smart without being competitive about it, kind without being naive, and somehow saw potential in me that I couldn't see in myself. We spent hours in her basement listening to music and talking about getting out of Cedar Falls someday. though neither of us had any concrete plans for how that might happen. The turning point came during my senior year in Mr. Harrison's American history class. We were studying World War II, and for some reason, the unit on women in the military captured my attention in a way nothing academic ever had before. I found myself staying after class to ask questions, checking out library books about the Women's Army Corps, becoming genuinely curious about something for the first time in years. Mr. Harrison noticed my interest and encouraged it, lending me additional materials and suggesting I write my final project on women breaking barriers in the armed forces. For weeks, I immersed myself in research about women like Colonel Ruby Bradley, who served as a nurse in World War II and the Korean War, and Brigadier General Anna Mae Hayes, the first woman promoted to general officer rank in the Army. These women had faced skepticism, discrimination, and countless obstacles, yet they'd persevered and achieved remarkable things. Something about their stories resonated with me, maybe because they represented a different kind of success than what my father valued, or maybe because they'd found purpose in service rather than personal achievement. My project earned an A, the first one I'd received in any class that year. Mr. Harrison wrote encouraging comments about my research skills and suggested I consider military service after graduation. The idea had never occurred to me before, but once planted, it began to grow. The military represented structure, purpose, and most importantly, a path forward that didn't require the kind of academic excellence that had always eluded me. When I mentioned the possibility to my parents, their reactions were predictably different. My mother worried about the dangers, the difficulty, the fact that military life would take me far from home. My father was more direct in his skepticism. He questioned whether I had the discipline for military service, whether I could handle the physical and mental demands, whether this was just another example of me avoiding real responsibility. His doubts stung, but it also sparked something defiant in me, a determination to prove him wrong that I'd never felt before. The conversation that changed everything happened on a cold November evening, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. I'd just received my report card, another collection of C's and D's that confirmed everyone's low expectations. My father was reading the local newspaper at the kitchen table when I walked in from school, and my mother handed me the mail with that careful expression she wore when she was trying to manage family tensions. Among the bills and advertisements was a brochure from the Army Recruitment Office. I'd requested it after visiting Sergeant Williams downtown, though I hadn't mentioned that visit to my parents. My father noticed me looking at it and asked what it was. When I explained, honestly and hopefully, that I was considering enlisting after graduation, his reaction was swift and crushing. He set down his newspaper and looked at me with the kind of exhausted disappointment I'd seen so many times before. Then he said the words that would echo in my mind for years. "Alex, you can't even handle high school. What makes you think you could survive in the military? You've never finished anything you started, never shown any real discipline or commitment. The Army isn't going to fix whatever's wrong with you. You need to face reality and stop chasing these fantasies about being something you're not." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother tried to mediate, suggesting we discuss it more when everyone was calmer, but the damage was done. My father had articulated what I'd always suspected he believed, that I was fundamentally flawed, incapable of achieving anything meaningful, destined for mediocrity at best. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my entire life. The next morning, I walked into the Army Recruitment Office on Main Street and sat down with Sergeant Williams. She was a compact woman in her 30s, with intelligent eyes, and a no-nonsense demeanor that somehow managed to be both intimidating and reassuring. I told her about my academic struggles, my family's doubts, my own uncertainty about my capabilities. She listened without judgment, then asked me a simple question. "What do you want to prove, and to whom?" I thought about it for a long moment before answering honestly. "I want to prove that I'm capable of more than everyone thinks, including myself. And I want to prove it to my father, who's never believed I could succeed at anything important." Sergeant Williams nodded, as if she'd heard similar stories before, then began explaining what military service could offer someone like me: structure, training, opportunities to develop leadership skills, and most importantly, a chance to discover strengths I didn't know I possessed. The process of enlisting wasn't simple. There were tests to take, paperwork to complete, physical requirements to meet. The ASVAB, the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, was particularly intimidating given my academic struggles. But something about the military environment, the clear expectations and structured approach to learning, clicked with me in a way traditional education never had. I scored well enough to qualify for several different career fields, ultimately choosing military police because it combined leadership opportunities with practical skills. The weeks leading up to my departure for basic training were tense at home. My mother worried constantly, asking questions about where I'd be stationed, how often I could call, whether I'd be safe. My father said little, but his skepticism was palpable. Sarah, preparing for her freshman year at Ohio State, seemed caught between excitement for her own future and concern about mine. The family dynamics we'd maintained for so long were shifting, and nobody quite knew how to navigate the change. Thanksgiving that year was particularly difficult. Extended family gathered as always, aunts and uncles and cousins filling the house with conversation about college plans and career prospects. Sarah's achievements were celebrated extensively, her acceptance to Ohio State discussed with pride and excitement. When attention turned to my plans, the conversation became awkward. My father mentioned my military intentions with the kind of tone people use when discussing an unfortunate medical diagnosis, emphasizing the temporary nature of enlistment and his hope that I'd come to my senses eventually. The moment that crystallized everything happened after dinner, when my Uncle Tom asked about my long-term goals. Before I could answer, my father interjected with the comment that would haunt both of us for years. Alex has always been a dreamer. The military might teach her some discipline, but let's be realistic about her potential. She's never been the type to amount to much, and I don't expect that to change, just because she puts on a uniform. The room fell silent. Even my cousins, typically absorbed in their own conversations, stopped talking. My mother's face flushed with embarrassment and anger, but she said nothing. Sarah looked horrified. I felt something break inside me, not in a dramatic, emotional way, but quietly and permanently, like a foundation shifting under too much weight. I excused myself from the table and went upstairs to my room, where I sat on my bed and made a promise to myself. I would prove him wrong, not just about the military, but about everything he believed about my character, my potential, my worth. It wouldn't be about anger or revenge, but about discovering who I really was when given the chance to grow beyond the limitations others had placed on me. 2 months later, I shipped out to Fort Moore in Georgia for basic combat training. The bus ride from Cedar Falls to the airport was quiet, my parents seeing me off with a mixture of worry and resignation. My father's goodbye was stiff and formal, a handshake and a wish for my safety that felt more like a business transaction than a father sending his daughter into a new life. My mother cried, holding me tightly and whispering reminders to call when I could, to stay safe, to remember I always had a home to come back to. Basic training was everything I'd expected, and nothing I could have prepared for. The physical demands were intense, but I discovered reserves of strength and endurance I'd never accessed before. The mental challenges were different from academic struggles, focused on problem-solving, teamwork, and leadership rather than memorization and test-taking. For the first time in my life, I excelled at something that mattered, something that required the full engagement of my mind and body. Drill Sergeant Martinez became an unexpected mentor, recognizing something in me that teachers and guidance counselors had missed. She pushed me harder than anyone ever had, but she also celebrated my progress in ways that built confidence, rather than just pointing out deficiencies. When I struggled with map reading, she worked with me after hours until I mastered it. When I excelled at tactical planning exercises, she recommended me for additional leadership training. The transformation wasn't immediate or dramatic, but it was real. Day by day, challenge by challenge, I discovered capabilities I'd never known I possessed. I learned to lead squads through complex exercises, to make decisions under pressure, to earn the respect of peers who initially saw me as just another recruit from a small Ohio town. The girl who couldn't handle high school algebra found herself calculating artillery coordinates and developing strategic plans. Phone calls home were infrequent and brief, limited by base policies and the demands of training. When I did speak with my family, the conversations were stilted and careful. My mother asked about my health and happiness. My father inquired about practical matters, like when I might be coming home for leave. Neither seemed to grasp the magnitude of the changes happening to me, the confidence and competence I was developing, the sense of purpose I'd found in service. Graduation from basic training was a profound moment, standing in formation with my fellow soldiers, wearing the uniform I'd earned through months of dedication and hard work. My parents came to the ceremony, and for a brief moment I saw something like pride in my father's eyes as he watched me receive recognition for outstanding achievement in leadership training. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by his usual caution about getting too excited about temporary success. Military Police School at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri presented new challenges and opportunities. The coursework was demanding, covering everything from criminal law to crisis management, but I thrived in the structured environment where clear standards and immediate feedback replaced the ambiguous expectations that had frustrated me in traditional education. My instructors noted my aptitude for leadership and recommended me for fast-track promotion opportunities. The first time I called home wearing sergeant stripes, my father's response was tepid congratulations followed by reminders about the importance of staying humble and not letting early success go to my head. His inability to celebrate my achievements stung, but it also fueled my determination to continue proving him wrong. Each promotion, each commendation, each leadership opportunity became another step in a journey I was taking as much for myself as for the girl who'd sat at that Thanksgiving table feeling worthless and directionless. My first real assignment came 18 months after graduation, stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, with the 101st Airborne Division. The transition from training environment to operational military life was jarring in ways I hadn't anticipated. Suddenly, I wasn't just learning procedures in controlled classroom settings, but applying them in real situations with real consequences. The military police unit I joined was responsible for base security, criminal investigations, and maintaining order among thousands of soldiers, each carrying their own stories, problems, and potential for both heroism and trouble. Captain Michelle Thompson became the commanding officer who would shape my understanding of leadership more than any textbook or training manual ever could. She was 32, had served 2 deployments in Iraq, and possessed the rare combination of tactical brilliance and genuine care for her soldiers that marked truly exceptional officers. During my first week, she called me into her office not for disciplinary reasons, as I initially feared, but to understand my background and goals. Captain Thompson listened as I explained my journey from struggling high school student to military police, my family's skepticism, and my determination to prove myself. She nodded thoughtfully, then shared something that surprised me. Her own father had been a career Marine who initially opposed her joining the Army, believing women couldn't handle combat leadership roles. She'd spent years proving him wrong, eventually earning his deep respect and pride. Her story gave me hope that family relationships damaged by doubt and disappointment could heal through demonstrated competence and character. The daily reality of military police work was more complex than I'd imagined. One morning might involve investigating a vehicle theft on base, the afternoon could require managing a domestic dispute between soldiers, and evening might bring responsibility for supervising the detention facility. Each situation required different skills: investigative thinking, diplomatic communication, physical courage, and the ability to de-escalate tension while maintaining authority. I discovered that the problem-solving abilities that had frustrated me in academic settings translated beautifully to practical challenges, where clear thinking and decisive action mattered more than memorization. My first significant case involved a series of burglaries in base housing, targeting military families during deployment cycles when spouses were alone with children. The investigation required interviewing dozens of witnesses, analyzing patterns, coordinating with civilian authorities, and ultimately conducting surveillance operations that led to arrests. Working that case taught me about patience, attention to detail, and the satisfaction that comes from protecting people who depend on you to keep them safe. The physical demands of the job pushed me beyond anything I'd experienced during training. Military police officers needed to be prepared for any situation, from foot pursuits to crowd control, from weapons handling to emergency medical response. I spent hours at the gym building strength and endurance, practiced martial arts to improve hand-to-hand combat skills, and trained continuously with firearms until shooting became second nature. My body transformed from the soft, uncertain frame of a teenager into something stronger and more confident. More importantly, my mind was changing too. The constant challenge of making decisions under pressure, leading junior soldiers, and handling complex situations built mental resilience I'd never possessed before. I learned to trust my judgment, to stand by my decisions even when they were unpopular, and to accept responsibility for outcomes whether they were successful or not. These lessons seemed foreign compared to the academic environment, where right answers existed in textbooks, and failure meant a bad grade, rather than compromised safety or mission failure. Letters from home arrived sporadically, usually filled with news about Sarah's progress at Ohio State, local happenings in Cedar Falls, and my mother's concerns about my well-being. My father's contributions to these letters were minimal, typically brief inquiries about when I might be coming home for leave, or reminders to be careful. His lack of interest in my growing responsibilities and achievements was painful but also liberating in unexpected ways. Without his approval to seek or his criticism to fear, I found myself making decisions based purely on what I believed was right. The promotion to corporal came after my first year at Fort Campbell, recognition for both technical competence and leadership potential that my supervisors had observed. Captain Thompson presented the stripes during a ceremony that felt more meaningful than my high school graduation had. Standing before my fellow soldiers, accepting increased responsibility and authority, I felt the profound satisfaction of earning something through merit, rather than simply fulfilling minimum requirements. My new rank brought new challenges and opportunities. As a corporal, I was responsible for training newer military police officers, a role that required me to articulate knowledge I'd internalized and help others develop skills I was still mastering myself. Teaching forced me to understand my work more deeply, to break down complex procedures into manageable steps, and to find different approaches for soldiers who learned differently than I did. Some struggled with the technical aspects of report writing, others with the physical demands of the job, still others with the psychological pressure of making split-second decisions. Working with Private Jackson taught me about the responsibility that comes with rank and authority. He was 19, from a small town in Alabama, and reminded me of myself 2 years earlier. Uncertain, eager to please, but lacking confidence in his abilities. During his first month, he made several mistakes that could have derailed his military career, including a poorly handled domestic disturbance call that nearly escalated into violence. Rather than simply documenting his failures, I spent extra time mentoring him, sharing what I'd learned about reading situations and managing stress. We practiced scenarios after duty hours, worked through case studies, and discussed the mental approaches that helped me stay calm under pressure. Watching him develop from an uncertain recruit into a competent, confident soldier was incredibly rewarding, and taught me that leadership meant investing in others' success rather than just managing their failures. The first deployment notification came during my second year at Fort Campbell. Our unit was being assigned to provide security and law enforcement support in Afghanistan, a role that would test everything we'd learned in a combat environment where mistakes had life-or-death consequences. The news brought a mixture of excitement and apprehension, understanding that this deployment would either confirm my growth as a soldier and leader or expose weaknesses I hadn't yet confronted. Preparation for deployment intensified our training regimen dramatically. We practiced convoy security procedures, studied Afghan cultural norms and legal systems, learned basic language phrases, and rehearsed responses to improvised explosive devices and insurgent attacks. The physical and mental preparation was exhaustive, but it also brought our unit together in ways that peacetime training couldn't achieve. We were no longer just colleagues working together, but a team preparing to depend on each other for survival. Captain Thompson pulled me aside 3 weeks before deployment to discuss a significant opportunity. She was recommending me for promotion to sergeant and assignment as a squad leader, positions that would give me responsibility for 8 soldiers and critical security missions. The recommendation required approval from higher command levels, but she believed my performance and leadership potential warranted the advancement. The possibility excited and terrified me simultaneously, representing validation of my growth while acknowledging the weight of responsibility for others' lives. The promotion ceremony took place 1 week before departure, conducted in the same building where I'd first reported for duty 2 years earlier. My parents couldn't attend due to the short notice and distance, but Captain Thompson arranged for the ceremony to be recorded so they could see it later. Standing before my unit as the sergeant's stripes were pinned to my uniform, I thought about the girl who'd left Cedar Falls with her father's doubts ringing in her ears. She seemed like a different person now, someone I barely recognized but was proud to have become. My squad for the deployment included soldiers with varying levels of experience, from veterans of previous deployments to first-time overseas assignments like myself. Building cohesion among 8 individuals with different backgrounds, skills, and personalities required leadership approaches I was still developing. Some responded to direct commands and clear expectations. Others needed encouragement and patient guidance. Still others required challenge and competition to perform their best. Private Martinez was a 22-year-old from Texas, whose confidence bordered on arrogance but whose technical skills were exceptional. Specialist Chen had served one previous deployment and possessed invaluable experience, but struggled with authority and following orders from younger leaders. Corporal Williams was older than me, had joined the military after losing a civilian job, and sometimes resented taking direction from someone he viewed as inexperienced, despite her rank. Welding these different personalities into an effective team required diplomatic skills I'd never needed before. I learned to give Martinez challenging assignments that satisfied his need for recognition, while teaching him humility through exposure to complex situations. I relied on Chen's experience while maintaining clear authority boundaries, asking for his input on tactical decisions while ensuring he understood that final choices remained mine. I found ways to utilize Williams' maturity and civilian experience while respecting the military hierarchy that made me his supervisor. The weeks before deployment also brought intensified communication with home, knowing that contact would be limited and uncertain once we reached Afghanistan. My mother called frequently, trying to balance support for my career with maternal worry about the dangers I'd face. Sarah had grown more interested in my military service as it became clear this wasn't a temporary phase, but a serious career path, asking detailed questions about my responsibilities and expressing admiration I'd never heard from her before. My father's attitude remained complex and difficult to interpret. He acknowledged my promotions and increasing responsibilities, but always with qualifications about the temporary nature of military service and the importance of planning for civilian life afterward. When I tried to explain the leadership opportunities and professional development the military provided, he listened politely but seemed unable to view my service as anything more than an extended educational experience before returning to real life. The conversation that crystallized his perspective happened during my last leave before deployment. We were sitting on the front porch of the house where I'd grown up, watching the sun set over neighborhoods that looked exactly as they had when I left 3 years earlier. He asked about my plans after military service, assuming I intended to return to Cedar Falls and find local employment. When I explained that I was considering making the Army a career, potentially serving 20 years or more, his reaction was swift and dismissive. He reminded me that I'd always struggled with long-term commitments, pointed out that military life was artificially structured and wouldn't prepare me for civilian responsibility, and suggested that I was using the Army to avoid making real decisions about my future. His words stung particularly because they echoed old doubts about my character and capabilities, suggesting that even my military success was somehow less meaningful than civilian achievements. That conversation reinforced my determination to prove him wrong, not through anger or rebellion, but by continuing to excel and grow in ways that would eventually be impossible to dismiss or diminish. I wanted to reach a level of success and recognition that would force him to acknowledge not just my accomplishments, but the person I'd become through military service. The deployment to Afghanistan would be my first opportunity to test myself in the most challenging environment the military could offer. The night before departure, I called home one final time before communication would become sporadic and uncertain. My mother cried, as I'd expected, making me promise to stay safe and call whenever possible. Sarah wished me luck and told me she was proud of me, words that meant more than she probably realized. My father's farewell was characteristically restrained, a simple wish for safety and a reminder to follow orders and stay out of trouble. Hanging up the phone, I felt the weight of representing not just myself but everyone who had ever doubted my potential. The next morning, boarding the aircraft that would take us halfway around the world, I carried with me 3 years of growth, training, and increasing confidence, but also the lingering echo of my father's skepticism and my own determination to prove that the girl who couldn't handle high school had become a woman capable of leading soldiers in combat. Afghanistan would be the crucible, where everything I'd learned would be tested against the ultimate challenges of leadership, courage, and character. Whatever happened there would either validate the transformation I believed had occurred, or reveal that my father's doubts about my fundamental capabilities were justified. Either way, I was ready to find out who I really was when everything was on the line. The heat hit me like opening an oven door when we stepped off the transport plane at Bagram Airfield. Afghanistan in July was a furnace of dust, diesel fumes, and endless sun that made Kentucky summers feel like gentle spring days. The landscape stretched endlessly in shades of brown and tan, broken only by distant mountains that shimmered like mirages in the heat. This would be home for the next 15 months, a world so foreign to Cedar Falls that it might as well have been another planet. Our forward operating base was designated Camp Phoenix, a collection of concrete barriers, prefabricated buildings, and guard towers surrounded by razor wire and watchful eyes. The military police compound occupied the northeast corner, strategically positioned to oversee the main gate and vehicle inspection areas. My squad inherited a sector that included the detention facility, evidence storage, and investigative offices, responsibilities that sounded routine until you added the constant threat of mortar attacks, suicide bombers, and insurgent infiltration. The first week was about establishing routines and learning the operational rhythm of a combat zone. Unlike the controlled environment of stateside training, everything here carried lethal potential. Vehicle inspections weren't just procedural requirements, but life-or-death searches for explosives and weapons. Detention operations managed suspected insurgents rather than drunk soldiers, requiring cultural sensitivity alongside security protocols. Patrol duties meant leaving the relative safety of the base to venture into villages where friendly faces could mask hostile intentions. My squad adapted to deployment life with varying degrees of success. Martinez thrived on the adrenaline and complexity, throwing himself into every mission with enthusiasm that sometimes bordered on reckless. Chen's previous deployment experience proved invaluable, as he helped newer soldiers understand the subtle signs of danger and the importance of constant vigilance. Williams struggled initially with the heat and isolation, but gradually found his footing as his civilian experience with conflict resolution proved surprisingly useful in dealing with local nationals. The cultural challenges were as significant as the security threats. Working with Afghan National Police required navigating language barriers, different legal systems, and deeply ingrained attitudes about authority, gender, and justice. As a female soldier in a leadership position, I faced skepticism from some Afghan officials who weren't accustomed to taking direction from women. Building effective working relationships required patience, cultural sensitivity, and the gradual demonstration of competence that couldn't be argued with regardless of gender. Our first major incident occurred 3 weeks into deployment, when intelligence reports indicated a planned attack on the main gate. My squad was assigned to coordinate with Afghan forces in establishing additional security checkpoints and conducting enhanced vehicle searches. The operation required deploying 8 soldiers to positions outside the wire, beyond the protective barriers of the base, where exposure to sniper fire and improvised explosive devices transformed routine security work into high-stakes tactical operations. The morning of the operation, I conducted final briefings with my squad, reviewing contingency plans and communication procedures while trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. Leading soldiers in training exercises was one thing, but making decisions that could result in their deaths or injuries carried weight I'd never experienced before. The responsibility felt crushing until I remembered Captain Thompson's advice about leadership: focus on the mission and trust your training rather than dwelling on everything that could go wrong. The enhanced security operation lasted 12 hours, during which we processed over 200 vehicles and detained 6 individuals whose documentation or behavior raised suspicion. The work was methodical and exhausting, requiring constant attention to detail while maintaining alertness for potential threats. Every approaching vehicle could contain explosives. Every nervous driver might be planning an attack. Every routine interaction carried the possibility of sudden violence. The real test came when our detection equipment identified anomalies in a truck carrying construction supplies. The driver, a middle-aged Afghan man with calloused hands and nervous eyes, claimed the materials were for a school renovation project in a nearby village. His documentation appeared legitimate, but something about his demeanor triggered my instincts. Rather than simply waving him through or automatically detaining him, I made the decision to conduct a thorough manual search, while treating him with respect and dignity. The search revealed nothing immediately suspicious, but Chen noticed inconsistencies in the vehicle's weight distribution that suggested hidden compartments. Further investigation uncovered a sophisticated cache of weapons and ammunition concealed beneath the construction materials, enough firepower to supply a significant insurgent operation. The driver eventually admitted under questioning that he'd been coerced into the smuggling attempt through threats to his family, providing intelligence that led to the arrest of 3 insurgent leaders. The successful interdiction earned recognition from higher command and validated my squad's training and procedures, but more importantly, it demonstrated that the leadership skills I'd developed could translate to life-or-death situations. Making the right call under pressure, trusting my instincts while following proper protocols, and balancing security requirements with human dignity felt like the culmination of everything I'd learned since leaving Cedar Falls. Communication with home during deployment was sporadic and precious. Internet access was limited and unreliable. Phone calls were expensive and difficult to schedule around operational demands. And mail delivery could take weeks. When I did manage to connect with family, the conversations felt strangely disconnected, as if we were speaking across more than just geographic distance. My experiences seemed impossible to convey to people living normal civilian lives in peaceful Ohio. My mother wanted details about daily life but struggled to understand when I tried to explain the complexities of working in a war zone. Sarah had started her senior year at Ohio State and was excited about graduate school applications, achievements that seemed simultaneously important and irrelevant from my perspective in Afghanistan. My father asked about practical matters like living conditions and when I expected to return, but showed little interest in the leadership responsibilities I'd assumed or the professional growth I was experiencing. The disconnect was particularly frustrating when trying to explain the significance of the weapons cache discovery. What felt like a career-defining moment to me sounded like routine police work to my father, who seemed unable to grasp the complexity and danger involved in combat zone operations. His response focused on reminding me to stay safe and follow orders, rather than acknowledging the initiative and leadership the situation had required. Winter in Afghanistan brought different challenges, but no reduction in operational tempo. The brutal heat gave way to bitter cold that made equipment maintenance more difficult and patrol duties more miserable. Heating systems in our living quarters were unreliable, hot water was a luxury, and the combination of dust and cold created respiratory problems for several squad members. The physical discomfort was manageable, but the psychological toll of constant vigilance began wearing on everyone. The isolation was particularly difficult during holidays. Thanksgiving arrived with little ceremony beyond slightly improved food in the dining facility, and satellite phone calls home for those lucky enough to secure time slots. Christmas brought packages from home filled with cookies, books, and reminders of normal life that felt increasingly foreign. New Year's Eve was marked by fireworks that might have been celebratory or might have been incoming mortar rounds. Uncertainty that perfectly captured the surreal nature of deployment life. My squad's cohesion strengthened through shared hardship and successful operations. Martinez's enthusiasm had matured into reliable leadership as he took responsibility for training new arrivals and maintaining equipment. Chen's experience proved invaluable during several complex investigations involving stolen military supplies and black market activities. Williams had emerged as the squad's diplomatic specialist, able to de-escalate tense situations with local nationals through patience and cultural sensitivity. The most challenging incident of our deployment occurred during the spring, when intelligence reports indicated insurgent activity in a village near our patrol route. My squad was assigned to coordinate with infantry units in conducting searches and questioning local residents. The operation required establishing a temporary command post in the village center while teams searched compound by compound for weapons, insurgents, or evidence of hostile activity. The morning started routinely enough, with convoy movement to the village and establishment of security perimeters. Local residents appeared cooperative, answering questions and allowing searches with minimal resistance. Children gathered to watch the soldiers, curiosity overcoming caution as they observed our equipment and procedures. The atmosphere felt more like community policing than combat operations. exactly the kind of environment where complacency could prove deadly. The explosion happened without warning, a massive blast that shattered windows, knocked soldiers to the ground, and filled the air with dust and debris. An improvised explosive device hidden in a donkey cart had detonated near our command post, wounding 3 soldiers and creating chaos that insurgents immediately exploited, with small arms fire from concealed positions. The friendly village atmosphere vanished instantly, replaced by a deadly urban battlefield where every doorway and rooftop could hide enemies. My training took over before conscious thought could interfere. Assess casualties, establish communication, coordinate response, maintain unit cohesion. The procedures I'd practiced countless times in training exercises became automatic responses to a situation where hesitation could result in additional casualties. I directed Martinez to establish a casualty collection point while Chen coordinated with infantry units to identify and suppress enemy fire positions. The firefight lasted 23 minutes, though it felt like hours. Insurgents had prepared multiple firing positions and escape routes, making it difficult to locate and neutralize threats. My squad's role was to secure the wounded soldiers, maintain communication with higher command, and coordinate medical evacuation while infantry units pursued the attackers. Every decision carried immediate consequences. Every order could mean the difference between life and death for soldiers under my command. When the shooting finally stopped and medical helicopters evacuated the wounded, I found myself sitting on the steps of a damaged building, hands shaking as adrenaline began wearing off. The 3 wounded soldiers would recover fully, but the incident had demonstrated how quickly routine operations could become deadly encounters. More importantly, it had tested my leadership under the most extreme circumstances possible and proven that I could function effectively when everything was at stake. The after-action review praised my squad's performance and my leadership during the crisis. Captain Thompson, who had arrived with reinforcements during the firefight, commended our tactical responses and professional handling of a complex situation. The formal commendation that followed cited exceptional leadership under fire and recommended me for accelerated promotion consideration. That night, calling home on the satellite phone, I tried to explain what had happened without causing excessive worry. My mother's fear was palpable, even across continents and poor phone connections. Sarah asked thoughtful questions about the tactical situation and expressed admiration for my calm handling of the crisis. My father's response was characteristically focused on practical concerns about my safety and when I would be coming home. The disconnect felt wider than ever as I tried to convey the significance of leading soldiers through combat, while he seemed unable to comprehend anything beyond his daughter being in danger. His lack of recognition for the leadership and courage the situation had required was frustrating but no longer surprising. I was growing beyond his ability to understand or acknowledge, becoming someone he couldn't diminish with skepticism about my capabilities. The final months of deployment brought increasing responsibility, as higher command recognized my squad's effectiveness and my leadership potential. We were assigned more complex operations, given greater autonomy in tactical decisions, and trusted with sensitive missions that required discretion and competence. Each successful operation built confidence and validated the transformation I'd undergone from uncertain recruit to combat-tested leader. The promotion to staff sergeant came 2 months before our scheduled redeployment, presented in a brief ceremony at the base chapel with my squad members present as witnesses. The additional stripes represented recognition of leadership under fire, technical competence, and potential for greater responsibility. More significantly, they marked another step in proving wrong everyone who had ever doubted my capabilities, including myself. Preparing to leave Afghanistan felt surreal after 15 months of adapting to deployment life. The base that had seemed alien and threatening upon arrival now felt familiar and manageable. The routines that had initially overwhelmed me with their complexity and danger had become second nature. The soldiers who had started as strangers assigned to my squad had become trusted teammates whose skills and character I knew intimately. The final weeks brought reflection on everything that had changed during deployment. I had led soldiers through combat, made life-or-death decisions under pressure, earned the respect of peers and superiors, and proven my capabilities in the most demanding environment possible. The girl who had struggled through high school seemed like someone from another lifetime, a distant memory of who I used to be before discovering who I could become. The flight home carried my squad, and dozens of other soldiers whose deployment was ending, each carrying their own stories of growth, challenge, and change. Looking out the aircraft window, as Afghanistan disappeared below the clouds, I felt both relief at returning to safety and pride in everything we had accomplished. More importantly, I felt confidence in facing whatever challenges awaited, knowing that I had been tested in the ultimate crucible and emerged stronger than I had ever imagined possible. Returning to Fort Campbell after 15 months in Afghanistan felt like stepping into a different world, though the base itself remained unchanged. The familiar buildings, training areas, and administrative offices looked exactly as they had when I'd left, but I was seeing them through different eyes. The person who had departed as a newly promoted sergeant with untested leadership abilities had returned as a combat veteran with proven capabilities and unshakable confidence in her own judgment. The reintegration process included mandatory counseling sessions, medical evaluations, and adjustment periods designed to help soldiers transition back to stateside operations. During these sessions, I found myself struggling to articulate the magnitude of change I'd experienced. The counselors asked about traumatic experiences, stress symptoms, and adjustment difficulties, but they seemed unprepared for a soldier who had thrived under combat conditions and found deployment to be a transformative rather than damaging experience. My new assignment reflected the recognition I'd earned overseas. Instead of returning to routine military police duties, I was selected for the Criminal Investigation Division, a specialized unit responsible for major crimes, security investigations, and sensitive matters requiring advanced investigative skills. The position required additional training at the military police school, but it also represented a significant advancement in responsibility and career prospects. The work in criminal investigation was intellectually challenging in ways that reminded me why I'd struggled in traditional academic settings while excelling in practical applications. Instead of memorizing theories from textbooks, I was analyzing crime scenes, interviewing witnesses, and building cases that required critical thinking, attention to detail, and the ability to synthesize complex information. Every investigation was different, requiring adaptive problem-solving skills that kept me engaged and motivated. My first major case involved a sophisticated theft ring operating across multiple Army installations, stealing equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and selling it through civilian channels. The investigation required coordinating with federal agencies, analyzing financial records, conducting surveillance operations, and building relationships with informants. The complexity was exhilarating, drawing on everything I'd learned about leadership, communication, and tactical thinking. The breakthrough came when I identified patterns in the theft reports that previous investigators had missed, connections between seemingly unrelated incidents that revealed the scope and organization of the criminal network. Building the case required months of meticulous work, gathering evidence that would withstand scrutiny in military court while ensuring the rights of suspects were protected throughout the process. The successful prosecution of the theft ring earned commendation from the Criminal Investigation Command and established my reputation as a thorough, innovative investigator. More importantly, it demonstrated that the leadership and analytical skills I'd developed during deployment translated effectively to complex investigative work. Each successful case built confidence and validated my decision to make the Army a career, rather than viewing military service as temporary experience. Communication with home during this period revealed the growing disconnect between my experiences and my family's understanding of my life. Phone calls and visits home became exercises in translation, trying to explain the significance of my work and advancement to people who had no frame of reference for military career progression. My mother was proud but worried, unable to understand why I chose challenging assignments when safer options were available. Sarah had graduated from Ohio State and started graduate school in psychology, pursuing research that focused on trauma recovery and resilience. Our conversations became more substantive as she began understanding the psychological aspects of military service and the factors that contributed to post-deployment growth, rather than just stress and difficulty. She was genuinely interested in my experiences and asked thoughtful questions about leadership development and decision-making under pressure. My father remained the most difficult family relationship to navigate. He acknowledged my promotions and professional recognition, but always with qualifications about the limitations of military career advancement and the importance of developing civilian marketable skills. When I explained my selection for criminal investigation and the advanced training opportunities it provided, he focused on questioning whether investigative experience would transfer to civilian law enforcement and whether I was limiting my options by specializing too narrowly. The conversation that crystallized our fundamental disagreement occurred during my first leave after returning from deployment. We were having dinner at Romano's, the Italian restaurant where my family celebrated special occasions, and he was asking about my long-term plans. When I explained my intention to pursue advanced education through military programs and potentially seek promotion to commissioned officer status, his reaction was swift and dismissive. He reminded me that I had always struggled with authority and independent thinking, suggested that military structure was preventing me from developing real leadership skills, and questioned whether I was using the Army to avoid making mature decisions about my future. His words carried the same tone of disappointed resignation I remembered from high school, as if my military success was somehow less legitimate than civilian achievements would have been. The moment that changed everything between us came when he made the comment that would haunt our relationship for years. Looking across the table with that expression of paternal concern I'd seen so many times before, he said the words that crystallized his fundamental misunderstanding of who I'd become. "Alex, you're doing well in the military because it's structured, and they tell you exactly what to do. But real success requires independent thinking and leadership abilities you've never demonstrated. I'm proud of your service, but let's be realistic about your long-term potential." The silence that followed felt different from previous family tensions. I wasn't the uncertain teenager seeking approval anymore, but a combat veteran with proven leadership capabilities and unshakable confidence in my own worth. His words didn't wound me as they once would have. Instead, they revealed the limitations of his understanding and his inability to recognize the person I'd become. My response was calm and measured, reflecting the emotional control I'd developed through years of military training and leadership responsibility. I explained the complexity of military leadership, the advanced education opportunities I was pursuing, and the level of responsibility I carried as a criminal investigator. I described specific situations where I'd made critical decisions under pressure, led teams through dangerous operations, and earned recognition from superior officers who understood military leadership requirements. His reaction revealed the depth of his misunderstanding. He seemed unable to comprehend that military leadership involved independent thinking, complex problem-solving, and decision-making skills that transferred to any professional environment. In his mind, military success was about following orders rather than giving them, about conformity rather than innovation, about temporary achievement rather than genuine capability development. The remainder of that leave was tense but civil, with both of us understanding that we saw my military career from fundamentally different perspectives. He viewed it as extended job training that would eventually lead to real civilian employment, while I saw it as a legitimate career path that offered unlimited opportunities for growth and advancement. The gap between our viewpoints seemed unbridgeable, but I was no longer seeking his approval or validation. Returning to Fort Campbell after that leave, I threw myself into work with renewed determination to prove that military leadership was as legitimate and challenging as any civilian career path. The cases I worked became progressively more complex, requiring skills that would have impressed any civilian investigator or law enforcement professional. Each successful investigation built credibility within the criminal investigation community and opened doors to additional opportunities. The selection for Warrant Officer Candidate School came 18 months after my return from Afghanistan, recognition of both my investigative achievements and leadership potential. The program would transform me from an enlisted soldier to a technical expert with officer-level authority and responsibility. More significantly, it represented validation of my capabilities by senior leaders who understood the requirements and challenges of military service. Warrant officer training was intellectually and physically demanding, combining advanced technical education with leadership development and professional military education. The coursework covered criminal law, forensic science, investigative techniques, and case management at levels that rivaled civilian law enforcement training programs. The leadership component focused on managing complex investigations, coordinating with multiple agencies, and making decisions that could affect national security. The transformation during warrant officer training was different from previous military education experiences. Instead of learning basic skills and procedures, I was developing expertise that would make me a subject matter expert in criminal investigation. The responsibility was both exciting and daunting, understanding that my decisions would affect major cases and that my expertise would be relied upon by commanders making critical choices. Graduation from Warrant Officer Candidate School brought my first assignment as Chief Warrant Officer 2, a position that combined investigative authority with supervisory responsibility for junior investigators. The promotion ceremony was attended by my immediate family, who made the trip to Fort Rucker specifically to witness this milestone. My mother's pride was evident and touching, Sarah's admiration was genuine and supportive, but my father's reaction remained characteristically restrained. During the ceremony, watching him observe as I received my warrant and took the oath of office, I saw something that might have been recognition flickering in his expression. The formal military setting, the respect shown by senior officers, and the obvious significance of the advancement seemed to penetrate his skepticism momentarily. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by his usual caution about celebrating temporary achievements. My new position at Fort Leonard Wood involved supervising a team of investigators handling major crimes across the Midwest region. The cases ranged from financial fraud and drug trafficking to espionage and terrorism-related offenses. Each investigation required coordination with federal agencies, civilian law enforcement, and military commands at various levels. The complexity and responsibility far exceeded anything I'd imagined when I first enlisted. The work was professionally fulfilling in ways I'd never experienced before. Leading a team of experienced investigators required diplomatic skills, technical expertise, and strategic thinking that drew on everything I'd learned throughout my military career. Building cases that could withstand legal scrutiny while protecting sources and methods required attention to detail and analytical abilities that kept me constantly challenged and engaged. The recognition came in various forms: commendations from superior officers, requests for expertise from other commands, and selection for advanced training programs normally reserved for senior officers. Each achievement built credibility and opened additional opportunities, creating a career trajectory that exceeded my most optimistic expectations when I'd first considered military service. More importantly, the professional success was accompanied by personal satisfaction that came from knowing I'd proven wrong everyone who had ever doubted my capabilities. The girl who couldn't handle high school had become a federal law enforcement officer with specialized expertise and national-level responsibilities. The transformation wasn't just about career advancement, but about discovering capabilities I'd never known I possessed. The phone call that would change everything came on a Tuesday morning in October, during a particularly complex investigation involving stolen military technology. I was reviewing case files when my phone rang, displaying my father's number at an unusual time for him to be calling. His voice sounded different, strained and uncertain in ways I'd never heard before. He explained that he was having coffee with his regular group at Murphy's Diner when his phone had rung with a call from someone identifying herself as General Patricia Martinez from the Pentagon. Initially thinking it was a scam or mistake, he'd nearly hung up before the caller explained that she was calling specifically about his daughter, Chief Warrant Officer Alex Johnson, regarding a matter of significant importance. The conversation that followed had lasted nearly 20 minutes, with General Martinez explaining that I had been selected for a special assignment requiring the highest level of security clearance, and that she wanted to personally inform my family of the honor this selection represented. She described my qualifications, achievements, and reputation within the criminal investigation community in terms that my father had never heard applied to any of his children. More significantly, General Martinez had addressed him as Colonel Johnson throughout the conversation, explaining that the courtesy title was traditional when speaking with the parents of accomplished military officers. She had thanked him for raising a daughter who exemplified the best qualities of military leadership, and had expressed her confidence that I would continue bringing honor to both the Army and my family. The impact on my father was immediate and profound. For the first time in my life, someone he respected and whose authority he couldn't question had described me in terms of exceptional capability and achievement. The general's recognition of my worth had forced him to confront the possibility that his assessment of my potential had been fundamentally wrong. His voice broke slightly as he tried to explain how the conversation had affected him, how hearing a senior military officer describe his daughter as an exceptional leader had forced him to recognize that he'd been viewing my achievements through the wrong lens. For the first time, he seemed to understand that military leadership was as legitimate and challenging as any civilian profession, and that my success represented genuine capability rather than temporary good fortune. The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd ever had, marked by his genuine curiosity about my work and his obvious pride in achievements he was finally beginning to understand. He asked detailed questions about my responsibilities, the significance of my warrant officer status, and the meaning of the selection General Martinez had mentioned. For the first time in my life, I felt that my father was truly seeing me as the person I'd become, rather than the disappointed teenager he remembered. The transformation in our relationship was immediate and profound, built on his recognition that the daughter he'd doubted had become someone whose achievements commanded respect from the highest levels of military leadership. The girl who'd left Cedar Falls with his skepticism ringing in her ears had returned as Chief Warrant Officer Johnson, and for the first time, he understood the magnitude of that transformation. The weeks following that pivotal phone call from General Martinez brought a transformation in my relationship with my father that I had never dared to imagine possible. Our conversation shifted from his questioning my choices to genuinely seeking to understand the work I was doing and the responsibilities I carried. For the first time in my life, I felt that he was seeing me as an accomplished professional rather than his disappointing eldest daughter, who had stumbled into temporary military success. The special assignment General Martinez had referenced turned out to be selection for the Army's most prestigious criminal investigation unit, tasked with handling cases involving national security, high-level corruption, and international criminal networks. The position required top-secret clearance, with special compartmented information access, recognition that I could be trusted with the nation's most sensitive investigations. The security clearance process alone took months, involving extensive background checks, interviews with friends and colleagues going back years, and psychological evaluations to ensure absolute reliability. During this period, my father began reaching out more frequently, genuinely interested in my career progression and the significance of the opportunities I was being offered. He started asking thoughtful questions about military structure, advancement requirements, and the differences between enlisted and officer responsibilities. His curiosity seemed genuine rather than skeptical, as if he was finally trying to understand a world he had previously dismissed. The clearance investigation brought unexpected validation when federal agents interviewed my family as part of the background check process. My father later told me that the agents had asked detailed questions about my character, judgment, and reliability, treating him as if his daughter was being considered for a position of significant national importance. The gravity of their questions and the respectful way they discussed my qualifications had reinforced General Martinez's message about the level of trust and responsibility I was being offered. Sarah called me after being interviewed by the investigators, excited about the questions they had asked and what they revealed about my career trajectory. She had always been supportive, but hearing federal agents describe me as a candidate for sensitive national security work had given her new perspective on my military achievements. Her pride was evident and touching, a complete reversal from the family dynamics that had characterized my high school years. The position itself exceeded my most ambitious expectations when I finally received the full briefing. I would be leading a team of investigators, working on cases that crossed international borders, involved multiple federal agencies, and required coordination with intelligence services from allied nations. The work combined criminal investigation with counterintelligence activities, requiring expertise in both traditional law enforcement and national security matters. My first case involved investigating a network of military contractors who were providing equipment and intelligence to hostile foreign governments. The investigation required traveling to multiple countries, coordinating with international law enforcement agencies, and building cases that would be prosecuted in both military and civilian courts. The complexity was staggering, involving financial transactions across dozens of banks, communications intercepts requiring court authorization, and surveillance operations in multiple time zones. The responsibility was both exhilarating and daunting, understanding that my decisions could affect national security and international relationships. Every interview I conducted, every piece of evidence I analyzed, and every recommendation I made carried weight far beyond typical criminal investigations. The pressure was intense, but it was also deeply satisfying to know that my work contributed directly to protecting military personnel and national interests. The investigation lasted 8 months and resulted in arrests across 3 countries, the recovery of millions of dollars in stolen equipment and intelligence, and the disruption of a criminal network that had been operating for over 5 years. The success brought recognition from the highest levels of military and civilian leadership, including personal commendations from the Secretary of Defense and the Director of the FBI. More importantly, the case established my reputation within the national security community as someone who could handle complex, sensitive investigations requiring discretion, expertise, and diplomatic skills. The work opened doors to additional opportunities and responsibilities that would have been unimaginable when I first enlisted as a struggling high school graduate seeking structure and purpose. During this period, my relationship with my father continued evolving in ways that surprised both of us. He began sharing details about my achievements with friends and colleagues, something he had never done before. My mother told me that he had started carrying newspaper clippings about military awards and recognition, though he rarely mentioned them directly to me. The man who had once questioned whether I could handle military discipline was now bragging about his daughter's national security clearance and international investigative work. The promotion to Chief Warrant Officer 3 came with assignment to the Pentagon, working directly for the Army's senior leadership on matters requiring the highest level of expertise and discretion. The position represented the pinnacle of warrant officer achievement in criminal investigation, recognition that I had become one of the Army's most trusted and capable investigators. The ceremony was held in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, attended by senior officers whose names I had only read in military publications. My parents made the trip to Washington for the promotion ceremony, my father's first visit to the Pentagon, and his first real exposure to the scope and significance of military leadership at the national level. Walking through the corridors lined with portraits of military heroes, observing the gravity and professionalism of officers making decisions that affected global security, seemed to provide him with context for understanding my career that he had previously lacked. The ceremony itself was conducted by General Martinez, who had initiated the phone call that changed everything between my father and me. She spoke about my qualifications, achievements, and the trust being placed in me with typical military precision, but she also took time to acknowledge my family's support and the values that had contributed to my success. Her words carried the authority and respect that my father had always sought for his children but had never believed I could achieve. After the ceremony, General Martinez made a point of speaking privately with my parents, thanking them for raising a daughter who exemplified the best qualities of military service. She described specific achievements and contributions that demonstrated both technical expertise and leadership capabilities, painting a picture of professional accomplishment that my father had never heard applied to any of his children. Her respect and admiration were genuine and obvious, impossible to dismiss or minimize. The conversation between General Martinez and my father lasted nearly 30 minutes, during which she explained the significance of my position, the level of trust it represented, and the impact my work had on national security. She addressed him respectfully as Colonel Johnson throughout the conversation, maintaining the military courtesy that acknowledged his status as the parent of a senior warrant officer. Her treatment of both my achievements and my family reflected the honor and respect that military culture extends to families of distinguished service members. The impact on my father was immediate and profound. For the first time, he was hearing about my capabilities and achievements from someone whose authority and expertise he couldn't question. General Martinez's description of my work and character carried weight that my own explanations had never possessed, forcing him to confront the reality that his daughter had achieved something genuinely exceptional. The drive back to their hotel that evening provided the setting for the most honest conversation my father and I had ever shared. He admitted that he had never understood military career progression or the significance of the positions I had achieved. His skepticism had been rooted in ignorance rather than insight, colored by his own experiences with factory hierarchies and civilian employment structures that bore no resemblance to military professional development. More importantly, he acknowledged that his doubts about my capabilities had been fundamentally wrong. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. His daughter, who had struggled through high school, had become a senior military officer, trusted with national security responsibilities, and respected by the highest levels of military leadership. The transformation wasn't temporary or artificial, but represented genuine capability and character development that he had failed to recognize. His apology was heartfelt and specific, acknowledging the damage his skepticism had caused, and expressing genuine pride in achievements he was finally able to understand and appreciate. For the first time in my life, I felt that my father truly saw me as the person I had become rather than the disappointed teenager he remembered. The validation was profound and healing, closing a wound that had driven my determination for over a decade. The months that followed brought a new dynamic to our family relationships, built on mutual respect and genuine pride in accomplishments that my father could finally recognize and celebrate. Our phone conversations became opportunities for him to ask thoughtful questions about my work and to share my achievements with friends and colleagues who had previously heard only about Sarah's academic success. The most meaningful moment came during my next leave home when my father asked if I would be willing to speak at his Rotary Club meeting about military service and career opportunities. The man who had once dismissed my military ambitions as unrealistic was now asking me to share my experiences with community leaders and business professionals who could benefit from understanding military leadership development. The presentation went well, with audience members asking detailed questions about military career progression, leadership training, and the skills that transferred to civilian professional environments. My father's introduction was particularly meaningful, as he described my achievements with obvious pride and spoke about the honor of having a daughter who served her country with distinction at the highest levels. After the presentation, several attendees approached my father to congratulate him on raising such an accomplished daughter and to express their newfound appreciation for military professional development. The respect and admiration they showed for my achievements reflected back on him as a parent, validation that his daughter had achieved something genuinely impressive that brought honor to the entire family. The transformation was complete when my father began encouraging other young people in our community to consider military service as a legitimate career path rather than a temporary alternative to college or civilian employment. His conversations with parents of struggling students now included examples of how military structure and leadership development could provide opportunities for growth and achievement that traditional educational paths might not offer. The girl who had left Cedar Falls with her father's doubts ringing in her ears had returned as Chief Warrant Officer Johnson, trusted by the highest levels of military leadership with the nation's most sensitive investigations. More importantly, she had proven that the potential he had failed to see was real and had always been there, waiting for the right environment and opportunities to flourish. The phone call from General Martinez had changed everything, not because it revealed anything new about my capabilities, but because it forced my father to see my achievements through the eyes of someone whose judgment he couldn't question. The skepticism that had driven my determination for over a decade had been replaced by pride and respect that would shape our relationship for the rest of our lives. Standing in my Pentagon office, looking out at the nation's capital and reflecting on the journey from that Thanksgiving dinner table to this moment, I understood that the girl who couldn't handle high school had become exactly who she needed to be. The transformation wasn't about proving my father wrong, but about discovering who I really was when given the opportunity to grow beyond the limitations others had placed on me. Sometimes the most profound victories aren't about defeating others, but about becoming so undeniably successful that skepticism becomes impossible to maintain. My father's phone call from General Martinez hadn't just changed his opinion of my potential. It had forced him to recognize that the daughter he had doubted had achieved something extraordinary that would make any parent proud. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.